Woolly mammoth, the animal at the center of every de-extinction conversation. Extinct for around 4,000 years, the last small population hung on in Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean long after the species vanished from the mainland. A Texas-based company called Colossal Biosciences is leading the project. They're using CRISPR to edit the genome of an Asian elephant, the mammoth's closest living relative, introducing around 65 genes linked to cold resistance, thick fat, curved tusks, smaller ears, a coat of dense hair. In 2025, they engineered something called the woolly mouse, a regular mouse with mammoth-like fur grown entirely from gene editing, as living proof the technique works. The first mammoth-elephant calf is expected in 2028. That gives them 3 years to recreate something the planet hasn't seen since the rise of agriculture. Tasmanian Tiger. Scientists call her the thylacine, a marsupial predator with the head of a wolf, the stripes of a tiger, and a pouch like a kangaroo. The last known one was named Benjamin. He lived in the Hobart Zoo in Tasmania. On the night of September 7th, 1936, the keepers forgot to lock him in his shelter. The temperature dropped. He froze to death outside the door. Black and white footage of him pacing his cage still exists. You can watch the last individual of an entire species yawn into the camera 9 decades after he died. But here's what changed everything. Museum specimens preserved in alcohol held intact DNA. A team at the University of Melbourne working alongside Colossal Biosciences has now sequenced the full genome in engineered cells of a small marsupial relative that already carry thylacine traits. The first pup could be born within 5 years. Gastric-brooding frog. Have you ever heard of a frog that swallowed her own eggs and gave birth through her mouth? That's not folklore. That's a real species, and scientists are trying to bring her back. Native to a few small streams in eastern Australia, last seen in the wild in the early 80s, and the way she reproduced is unlike anything else in the natural world. The female would lay her eggs, the male would fertilize them, then she would swallow them. The eggs traveled down her throat and into her stomach, where she shut down her own digestive acid and let them develop inside her belly for 6 to 8 weeks. When the tadpoles were ready, she opened her mouth and the babies came out fully formed. The species went extinct before anyone could fully study how the chemistry worked. In 2013, Australian scientists pulled DNA from frog tissue frozen since the 1970s. They implanted it into the egg of a relative. The embryos started dividing. They stopped too early. The Lazarus Project is still trying. Pyrenean Ibex. Locals called her the bucardo, a wild mountain goat with massive curved horns that lived for centuries in the cliffs between Spain and France. The last individual was a female named Celia. Scientists tracked her with a GPS collar. On January 6th, 2000, they found her crushed under a fallen tree. But before she died, researchers had collected small tissue samples from her ear. 3 years later, they cloned her. A newborn kid was implanted into a domestic goat and carried to term. The baby was born alive in July of 2003, and then 7 minutes later, she suffocated, a lung defect. The first species ever brought back from the dead. She lasted 7 minutes, which makes the bucardo the only animal in history to go extinct twice. Spanish researchers are reportedly preparing to try again. Dodo. Okay, now my personal favorite of the list. A flightless bird that lived on a single island, Mauritius, in the Indian Ocean. She had no natural predators, she didn't need to fly, she didn't need to run, she didn't even fear humans because she had never seen one. When Dutch sailors arrived in the late 1500s, that trust killed her. Within a single century, the dodo was gone. She became the symbol of human-caused extinction, the exact bird every conservation textbook starts with. In 2023, Colossal Biosciences raised $150 million specifically for the Dodo project. The team is led by Beth Shapiro, one of the most respected paleogeneticists in the world. The plan? Edit the genome of the Nicobar pigeon, her closest living relative, and rewild the result back on Mauritius, where it all started. This time, with humans watching. Passenger pigeon. Imagine a bird whose flocks were once so massive they blocked out the sun for 3 full days. Not a story, documented. The most abundant bird in North American history, 3 billion individuals, possibly 5. In the 1800s, their migratory flocks were so massive that observers reported darkening skies that lasted for hours, sometimes for days. One naturalist watched a single flock pass overhead in Kentucky and estimated 2 billion birds in the sky at one time. Then came industrial hunting. The railroad made it possible to ship pigeon meat across the continent by the ton. In less than 50 years, the most abundant bird in the Americas was wiped out. The last passenger pigeon was named Martha. She died alone in the Cincinnati Zoo in 1914. The organization Revive and Restore has been working to bring her back since 2012, editing the genome of the band-tailed pigeon, her closest living cousin. Once she returns, if she returns, the skies might darken again. Dire wolf, the wolf everyone learned about from Game of Thrones. Real animal, roamed North America, went extinct around 12,000 years ago. In April of 2025, Colossal Biosciences announced they had brought it back. 3 pups, Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi. The press called it the first successful de-extinction in history. But here's where the story gets uncomfortable. The pups weren't built from dire wolf DNA. They were gray wolves with about 20 gene edits, just enough to express bigger size, thicker fur, and a wider skull. Scientists outside Colossal called them synthetic proxies. A King's College London researcher described the entire project as an illusion. Beth Shapiro herself once said, "Once a species is gone, it's gone." So when we say we brought something back, what exactly came back? The body, or just the shape of it? The moa, the tallest bird that ever walked the earth, 12 feet tall, 500 pounds, flightless, native to New Zealand. She vanished about 600 years ago, hunted to extinction by the first Maori settlers who arrived on the islands and found a giant that had never known a predator. Within a few centuries, 9 moa species were gone. In July of 2025, Colossal Biosciences announced a partnership unlike any other in this field. The project is led by the Ngai Tahu Research Center, a Maori indigenous institution, and the cultural ambassador, Peter Jackson, the director of The Lord of the Rings, who has personally collected over 400 moa bones across decades. The plan is not just resurrection, it's restoration on indigenous land under indigenous oversight, guided by the people who watched her disappear. Because if a species has to come back, maybe that's the only honest way to bring her.